Okay, so the first, this is part 2, which I had given you the handouts that have all the pathway, like the big flow chart looking thing with the boxes and stuff like that. And that's what this has to do with. Is we're now going to be starting to talk about how glucose enters into glycolysis. Because many of the foods that we eat do not just have glucose in them. Okay, so it has to be, we have to break it down in order to get it to enter in some point in time throughout this glycolytic pathway. Right. And so here we talk about the fate of carbs, the bane of many of our existences, at least. So the fate of carbs. Many carbohydrates. Now we're not talking about the insoluble dietary fiber which your body uses for bulkage in order to move bolus around. But many times, most carbohydrates, besides glucose, meet their fate somehow in glycolysis. And so we have to transform it to some type of intermediate along that 10-step pathway. Glycogen and starch are just the storage polysaccharides, and we can get that from two places. They call it exogenous, which means from outside. Okay, that's the exogenous is your diet, and then endogenous is what your body has stored. Okay. Then we have the common disaccharides like sucrose. What is sucrose? Sugar. That's table sugar. That's one that we're most common. Lactose, which comes from that's milk. Okay. Maltose, which is a common sugar that's used, and then there are others. I mean, like trehalose. We'll actually talk about some of the others. Okay. Then there are monosaccharides, which are fructose, which fructose is common. Where does fructose come from? Fruit. I mean, that's what the name comes from. But you hear about that high fructose corn syrup, and they say, oh, it's all natural. Technically, it is. It does come from corn syrup. It does come from corn. But what they do is they boil it down to its high concentration. That's one of the reasons why some people say, you should really avoid it, in the sense that it's highly concentrated, mannose, lactose, and then there are lots and lots of these. This slide right here is not, but it's I'm leading to the big flow chart, like the big picture. And so that's the hand I gave you, this. So that's what the bulk of today is. I'm just going to go over that. Right, so we have this big picture. We're going to be talking about how everything is broken down and how it flows into glycolysis. And in this picture, where is sometimes people don't recognize it, but this really is glycolysis. This really is glycolysis. Where is glycolysis here? Right. Parts of it is all the way from, if you started, instead of seeing normal up and down, here's glucose, 6-phosphate, and so on and so forth. And so that's why you can kind of see it in there, but it is there. And so this ends with glyceraldehyde, 3-phosphate. And so then you have to realize, quote unquote, regular glycolysis would occur beyond that. This only shows you, I'm going to call it the top half, but something happened.
Did you give us this handout, you said?
I did that very first day.
I know it's on my phone.
I don't think we got
Oh, maybe it's just on my fire. But, okay, because I was going to say, the very first day of, when we were doing, I thought I printed it out, but it's on my fire. Because this is essentially what this PowerPoint is. All right, many of these you could actually figure out on your own. And I just want to point out that once you get to fructose, there are two different ways. It's bifurcated in that sense, where if it's in the liver, it undergoes this way. And we're going to find out the liver and the pancreas, to a certain extent, kind of does things on their own, because they have very specific pathways that may be a little slightly different sometimes in other tissues because of their functions. Or if it's in muscles, kidneys, and things like that, it goes this way, okay, because it doesn't, they don't have the same enzymes or same isoforms. But we'll get to that point. So we're going to start off with lactose. Okay, so we're up here with lactose. I really don't like this.
So does that mean you could go either to de-lactose or to glucose? How that
So what is lactose? Lactose is
from
Lactose is the sugar from milk, but what is it made up of? If you think back to last semester, I didn't have you guys memorize all the common. It's a disaccharide. It's a disaccharide that's made up of a glucose and a galactose. So that's what this is showing you. And once again, I don't expect you to memorize. Okay, lactose has a glucose and a galactose. It's a disaccharide. And so we're going to have this enzyme here that breaks it apart into two monosaccharides. One of which is glucose, the other one's galactose, and then galactose will go this way, glucose goes this direction. So what enzyme, does anyone know what enzyme breaks down lactose into the two monosaccharides? It's lactase. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's lactase. And it's going to break it down into those two monosaccharides.
So there's obviously like this like lactose intolerance. Is there like fructose intolerance or like any?
Right. In theory you can have. Any of these could be faulty. You may have ways around it that are redundant, like we can see here, where there may be ways around it to where you could utilize it someplace else. Sometimes a mutation may be lethal. Like if it's early enough on, they say a high percentage of, fertilization events in humans are spontaneously aborted. And so it could be due to, some metabolic pathway along the way. And so then you don't see it come to fruition. Well, then there are others like the lactose to where people develop it through epigenetics. Either they overcome it, or sometimes the way that it gets expressed from the fetus to the small adult, from fetus to child to to adolescence to adulthood, then the different isoforms get expressed differently. Okay, so in theory, yes. Right. I just don't know if that would be lethal or not. Right. So it was lactase. Next up, we're going to be talking about glycogen and starch. So right here, glycogen and starch, which are your stored sugars. And there are two enzymes that break these down. Okay, one of them, if you think about it, whenever we eat a starchy food like a bread, we put it in our mouth, we're chewing it, that's when the first enzyme starts to break it down. Does anyone know what's that enzyme called? It's amylase. In particular, it's called alpha amylase. So that's this right here. It's a hydrolase right there. Unfortunately, I didn't leave myself much room, but this right here is alpha amylase. Now, this enzyme right here is one that we could actually figure out knowing what we know. Whoops, I kind of covered it up, though. The important part. This enzyme right here it takes your stored glycogen. Glycogens are just a bunch of glucoses that are stuck together in big, long lines, and not the branching one. And so, but the really long lines of the glucose molecules, it takes an inorganic phosphate and it adds it, and it breaks it apart by adding on that inorganic phosphate. So, what class or classes of enzymes can add on phosphates using inorganic phosphate? You could say phosphatase, but what do phosphatases usually do?
Break it down.
They usually break it down. So if we were going backwards, maybe. What's the other class? It uses the inorganic phosphates. It's phosphorylase. This one in particular, by the way, is glycogen phosphorylase. But whenever I show you the box, this is phosphorylase at this point in time. You're going to find out it's glycogen phosphorylase because it phosphorylates glycogen. But it does so, it breaks it apart, it adds an inorganic phosphate, so that way now we have a glucose 1-phosphate that can go ahead and almost be ready for the main event of glycolysis. There we go. So we have alpha amylase, we've got the glycogen phosphorylase. Remember that PI just means inorganic phosphate. Okay. And This is just a blow up of that. Let me make it a little smaller where we can read all of it. So it's cleaved by glycogen phosphorylase. And remember, it's called a phosphorylase because it's phosphorylating, but it's not using ATP, GTP, or any of the other NTPs. It's using an inorganic phosphate. This is the way they like to sometimes they write it. See, this means it's a repeating monomer to the nth number in a row. It takes a phosphate, which acts as a nucleophile, which breaks it apart. Now we have N-1 units in a row, monomers in a row, and we have a glucose 1-phosphate. So that's glycogen phosphorylase. However, this works whenever there's the long lines. Remember last year we showed, and I'm going to, a lot of times it kind of showed it as like the little cartoons that kind of look like this, where the sugars were obviously the oxygens and stuff, but you know, it's like a 1,4 linkage. Well, our body, we don't just store it in 1,4 linkages. We also have it in 1,6 linkages. So then we'll have some that come up like this to start another chain. You know, whoops. That's supposed to all look the same. But we have that branch in there. Well, glycogen phosphorylase can't do a branch. So it's another one of my favorite enzyme names in the world that does that, because it tells you I mean, it does have an official enzyme commission name, which is probably really, really long. But what everybody calls it is the debranching enzyme. That's why I like it. It tells you exactly what it does. So what happens here is we have, we have all of these alpha 1,4 linkages for glucose in a row. Normally, and actually, with the enzymes coming down this quote-unquote branch, it comes down, it's fine, the glycogen phosphorylase. It gets to this point, and it's sterically hindered. It can no longer chew it up. And so what happens is the debranching enzyme comes along, and it removes the 3, not this one, but the 3 here, and sticks it at the bottom of the branch below it. Or neighboring branch. I said below, but remember this is in 3 dimensions, it's moving around. And the neighboring branch. And so now the phosphorylase can come ahead and just break it down. And it's down to a single one, and so it can also be broken down. So we can just come in and just breaks it apart. Chews it up. So debranching enzyme is the one that debranches the glycogen branches. Arms. I don't know how else to say it. Okay, so back on that big, I thought I had put the little big scheme. We have to find a way to take that glucose 1-phosphate and turn it into glucose 6-phosphate. Right, there has to be a way, because it's glucose 6-phosphate that enters in step 2 of glycolysis. So what is the difference between, like on the bigger scheme of things, between glucose 1-phosphate and glucose 6-phosphate? What are they with respect to each other?
Isomer.
They're isomers. And so what class or classes of enzymes can do this?
Isomerase.
It's an isomerase, or what's the other class? It's a mutase. And this one, by the way, it's called a mutase.
So, to get to glucose 1-phosphate, like the debranching enzyme debranches.
It's a phosphorylase that brought it down to this. Debranching just literally moves it down to the neighboring branch, so that way the phosphorylase can chew it up and spit out the little monomers.
So the glycogen gets phosphorylated
By the phosphorylase.
to glucose 1-phosphate.
Mm-hmm. When it gets broken apart, because the way that it gets the way that it got broken apart, just for the time being, let's see what let me. Oh, awesome! Wow. And this is just a real oversimplification, but we can imagine that we've got a nucleophile such as phosphate. I don't want to draw it all the way out. because it's going to have other charges and things hanging off of it right here. But this is a good nucleophile, and so then we have an electrophile in the sense that the sugar, which, like I said, this is definitely an oversimplification. Right there, and so you can imagine this coming in, smacking the carbon and popping this off. I may have it backwards. Nope, that's the right one. Okay, so you come and smacking that and popping that off. So the enzyme uses the inorganic phosphate in a roundabout way. Obviously, inorganic phosphate itself would not be, it's perfectly happy by itself, so first of all, the enzyme would be phosphorylated and then it passes that phosphate off.
Okay.
Let me see, can I move that over here? Move this back down. Oh, that is just awesome. I'm having a lot of fun with this. I don't know if you are, but I am. Okay, and so this is a mutase. This one is phosphoglucomutase. I've got it written out in the next slide, but or maybe easier to read. Which makes sense. These are phosphorylated glucoses, and it's a mutase because it's isomerase. If they had called it phosphoglucose-isomerase or phosphoglucose isomerase, I'd give you most, if not all, the credit for it, because people would understand you're doing an isomerization reaction based off of these phosphorylated glucoses. So there's the word written out. Now we're going to move on to trehalose. So trehalose is up here. Trehalose is a disaccharide of glucose. So that's why that, if you notice, it only leads to glucose, whereas lactose made a glucose and a galactose. So knowing what you know about these enzymes, what do you suppose the name of this enzyme is? So what was it for lactose? Lactase. And so what do you suppose it is for trehalose? It's trehalase. Yep. So it's trehalase.
And it's like, is that a reversible reaction or is that irreversible?
I'm going to hypothesize here and say that in humans it's probably irreversible, just because I wouldn't know why we would want to make trehalose. Same thing with lactate. I mean, we don't usually. Well, no, that's not quite right. So we typically don't go backwards in that sense.
Okay.
Especially anytime that we need energy, we definitely wouldn't be going backwards. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and we'll come back. We're going to come back to this step right here, but we're going to focus on sucrose, because we did lactose was lactase, trehalose is trehalase, so we have sucrose, and sucrose is a disaccharide that consists of a glucose and a fructose, and that's why I wanted to do it before we focus on glucose. So knowing what we know, what do you suppose the name of the enzyme that does sucrose is called? It is sucrase. See, so it's really simple in that sense. So it's sucrase. Keep looking at the clock on here because it says it's 7 p.m. All right. So, what happens to the glucose next? I also include these as little prompts to myself, so that way I can follow along. So here we have glucose. Glucose becomes glucose 6-phosphate at the expense of an ATP is what it shows, and that is our good friend hexokinase. That's just the first step of glycolysis. Nothing new. So now we're going to focus on fructose, but we're going to look at the fructose in the kidneys and muscles. We'll come back to it for the liver. But in kidneys and muscles, which is the diagonal one. So We had sucrose. If you've either eaten fruits with higher in fructose, or if you've had table sugar and so you've had an increase in fructose in general, then and you're in the kidneys or the muscles, it's going to go this direction. And so we have an ATP. It gets added onto fructose to make fructose 6-phosphate, which is a portion of, this is just a part of regular glycolysis. So what class or classes of enzymes do you suppose can do that? It's a kinase. And so what kinase can do it? It's just hexokinase. Yes. That's one of the reasons why I really push the fact that sometimes whenever they have that more of a generic class name, that they are more, the enzyme word that they use is promiscuous. They have a higher, they accept more substrates than, I don't say products, but they accept more substrates than something that's very specific, okay? So it's called hexokinase. It is hexokinase. It's hexokinase, so it makes fructose 6-phosphate. So now let's focus about what happens to it in the liver. So in the liver, once again, we have fructose, and we're phosphorylating it, but we're not making fructose 6-phosphate, we're making fructose 1-phosphate. So what class or classes, and it utilizes ATP, that's what the little figure here means. What class or classes of the enzymes can do this? It's a kinase, and so if we were to name it, could be, and so you said hexokinase, and it could be a hexokinase. What else could be that's specific? Since this one's specific. This one's not phosphofructokinase because it's not phosphorylated yet. I can see where you're going. This one's just fructokinase. So the isoform of the hexokinase in the liver that specifically phosphorylates fructose is called fructokinase. And notice it adds a phosphate in a different location than hexokinase. So it has not only does it have a different specificity, it has a different site on the substrate that it acts on. Okay. So now we're still in the liver. We've made fructose 1-phosphate. The product of this enzyme here, well, technically there are two products. So one is glyceraldehyde, and one is DHAP, dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Now, in glycolysis, we had fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, which gets turned into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and what? And DHAP. Okay, what enzyme does they kind of have it shown differently here. What enzyme is it that goes from fructose 1,6-bisphosphate to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate? It's an aldolase, okay? This right here is an aldolase. I don't know, I've got two of the same things in this. This one's just called fructose 1-phosphate aldolase. Okay, it's very specific. It's an aldolase that's specifically for fructose 1-phosphate to make DHAP, our good friend DHAP, but the other product it makes is glyceraldehyde. It doesn't make glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Because we didn't start off with the bisphosphate before. Because like I said, the liver, does anyone want to hypothesize, why does the liver have different pathways? And a lot of times, we actually even talked about this last semester when we talked about, or maybe eating semester news that maybe we hadn't talked about it yet. Maybe I should talk about that. No, but thanks, chapter. All right, so why do you suppose that the liver would have different pathways, little different nuances than it would than the other tissues? Look, what does the liver do? It does what?
This like filters everything.
I mean, the liver has, and I read this one time, I don't know how they did, over 500 different functions. I mean, it has many, many, many functions. By having different pathways like this, it's not competing directly against the other tissues. So we're going to see this over and over again, especially with regulation, that the liver will be its own way. Sometimes the pancreas will do something similar to this too, because of the way that it's connected, similar physiology. But the liver, that way, the liver, whenever you need energy, say the muscles need energy, the heart needs energy, and the brain needs energy, it has ways where it won't compete. It kind of down-regulates itself, or it's not as active. Either their isoforms aren't as active, or they have higher KMs or things like that, where they won't compete with it won't compete with the other tissues. So that way the brain in particular will find out for glucose, and or the muscles with some of these other components, they can get the energy first. And so then the liver takes like a back seat to it in a sense. And so you can have different metabolic shunts or little pathways here. They're not, I mean, still part of the same pathway, but you can see it takes just a little different step. So that way it can be regulated differently and it doesn't compete frequently. All right. So now says DHAP. What about DHAP in the liver? We have DHAP. DHAP becomes glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. What enzyme or enzymes can do that? That's just your good friend. I'm just going to write out TPI, but it's that triose phosphate isomerase. It's the same one, because it's the same thing. Remember that was step 5 whenever you were doing glycolysis. Nothing new there. There it is. That way it's bigger in case you needed to see it. Now, what about glyceraldehyde? See, it's a little different. Because we've got to make, in order to continue on with glycolysis, we've got to transform it into glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. It utilizes an ATP. It's a kinase. Okay? And so this one, what are some of the names that it could possibly be called? Glyceraldehyde kinase, and if you called it glyceraldehyde kinase, I'd give you the credit for it. This one's actually a promiscuous one. It's called triose kinase. But yes, it's a sugar. It's got 3 carbons, which glyceraldehyde is the simplest of the sugars. And so that's why it's triose kinase. But if you called it glyceraldehyde kinase, I'd give it to you. But it should make sense. It utilizes ATP. It's adding on a phosphate group. Make glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. From this point on, the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, which goes on to what would be step 6 in glycolysis. And so steps 6 through 10 would be identical to what we've seen in the past. We're going to go up here now to look at mannose and galactose and the other sugars. All right, so we have mannose. Mannose is next. Mannose is a disaccharide. I'm sorry, mannose is not disaccharide. Mannose is a monosaccharide, but it's a different one than glucose. But we're going to utilize it. We can't even utilize mannose and ultimately get energy. So the first step here is mannose becomes mannose 6-phosphate at the expense of an ATP. So what class or classes of enzymes can do this? Kinase. And so what kinase could it be? You could say mannose kinase. What else could it be? It's hexokinase. Remember, it's a promiscuous little booger. It does fructose, it does mannose, it does glucose. It gets around. If it helps you to think of it that way, it gets around. Then mannose 6-phosphate becomes fructose 6-phosphate. And the only way, it's very similar to what we've seen before. It's an isomerase. Mm-hmm. And so, what isomerase could it be? This one's phosphomannose isomerase. So you should it makes sense now. Hopefully if you start to learn the logic behind these, it helps out a lot. And for those in chemistry of cancer, I don't know if you've started picking that up on the paper that we started reading on that review. They start talking about kinases and they're talking about isomerases and things like that. It's the same thing over and over again. There's only so many ways that you can do this. So yes, nothing new and earth-shattering with that one. We're going to focus on galactose. This is where galactose is the difficult one of the sugars. Okay, and there are diseases and things associated with galactose. So we're going to look at galactose in depth. But I like to do this one because it's a good review. So first up, we have galactose. Galactose gets a phosphate added onto it at the expense of an ATP. So it's going to be a kinase. And if you notice, what position it gets phosphorylated? It's 1. Okay. When we did the hexokinases, what position got phosphorylated by the promiscuous hexokinase? 6. So this one's not hexokinase. It's not because how many carbons are in galactose? 6. So it's not triose. This one is a galactokinase. And now what galactose does is when we utilize galactose is it's cyclical in order for it to make UDP glucose. Okay? And so it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So it's like a little circle that kicks off each time, kicks off the glucose 1-phosphate, which can then enter into glycolysis, like what we saw before with some of the other sugars. But this very first one, what it's doing is if you look at it, it's a UDP glucose that gets added to the galactose 1-phosphate. So they just call it UDP galactose because it's going to get really, really, like the official name would be like uridyl diphosphate, so they call it UDP glucose. So what class or classes of enzymes can add things or move things? Yes, this was a transferase. Okay? This name is hard, but it tells you exactly what it does. Okay? That's why it's a mouthful. That's why I wanted to. But if you break it down, it literally tells you exactly what it does. It's a transferase. It transfers uridyl, okay? And it utilizes UDP glucose to the galactose 1-phosphate. So that's why if you see that name, it literally tells you, okay, this is what I'm doing. We're going to be transferring this, I'm going to call it U, because I have problems saying uridyl, that one. It transfers the U from UDP glucose to galactose 1-phosphate. And one of the reasons why is UDP is a great leaving group. Okay, this is going to become a really great leaving group later on. So it's just its way of activating it. Plus, if you notice, as we go down, I'm going to kind of go a little fast here. When we use galactose, we actually get more energy than we do from glucose. And that's because the next two steps utilizes, and you make an NADH. And remember, NADH, which we find out a lot about more later on, each one of these goes on to make more ATPs through the electron transport chain. So like bang for your buck, you're going to get more ATPs, mole per mole from galactose than you would for glucose. Okay, so what class or classes of enzymes utilize NADH? This is dehydrogenases. Okay, but this one's got a special name, and that's one. It's one that I wanted to point out. It's a new class of enzymes. We only see it 2 or 3 times all semester long. It's called an epimerase, and if you think back, way back to last semester, sugars, like the different forms of sugars, are called epimers of each other. Okay. Now, if you told me dehydrogenase, I give you most of all the credit. It does have the dehydrogenase activity. What it does is this is literally taking and it's turning galactose ultimately into glucose. Because the only difference between galactose and glucose is, see here we have the alcohol that's pointing up and then alcohol pointing down. But our body utilizes this for glycolysis. So it uses an NAD to NADH to first take this alcohol to turn to a ketone. And I'll just tell you this right now, it's running out of time. It's the exact same enzyme that does a second step and turns that ketone into the other alcohol. And so we get 2 NADHs out of this, and those can go on to make a total of 5 ATP, because it's 2.5 per one, per NADH. So you can actually get more ATP in that sense. And then now it's UDP glucose, which comes up here to the transferase, because I won't have to say all of it, which will kick off that glucose part to go on to glycolysis, and we'll have the U that gets added onto the next galactose. And so that's why it just continually goes on and on and on. Okay, and so that's the end of all of the